Thank you so much, Ms. Rojal, for those inspiring words. As we have seen over the course of C40 Mayors Summit, local action by mayors is critical to addressing global climate change. However, we also know that national, state, and regional governments must be supportive and empowering partners for mayors aiming to secure a climate-safe, prosperous, and equitable future for all the citizens. Our next session is focused on how we can collaborate better across different levels of governments, and it's appropriately called, "We are all in this together," building coalition between nations, states, and cities. But before we bring the panel to the stage, we would like to begin with an opening address by Dr. Jonathan Pershing. Dr. Pershing is a special envoy for climate change at the US Department of State. She has previously held senior roles in climate, energy, and environment in the US Department of Energy, the World Resources Institute, and International Energy Agency. Dr. Pershing has published and lectured widely on climate and energy issues and has served as a lead author and collaborator to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So please welcome to the stage, Dr. Pershing. Good morning. Welcome.
So thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's particularly a pleasure to follow Minister Royal. I think all of us need to acknowledge the debt we owe to France for the delivery of the Paris Agreement and the work we've done. So thank you very, very much. I think it's also suitable to be here in Mexico. The current chair, the current executive secretary of the UN climate negotiations is Patricia Espinosa, former foreign minister of Mexico, hosted a meeting in Cancun, which in some ways helped launch some of the process that culminated in Paris. Mexico has an enormous and proud record to share with all of us. And then you, of course, the mayors, people working at a local level, speak, I think, in terms of the next steps and a generation of new activities that we have to take. I've decided to divide my few minutes here into a couple of different segments, and I thought I might start by looking back. Because in some sense, if we can look back and see how things have changed, we're in a good position then to look forward and see what we might anticipate the same distance forward as we look back. This process really began in many ways 25 years ago. I, along with a few others in this room, were at the negotiations. They were actually held just outside of Washington, D.C., Many people may not know that the first preparatory sessions were something that were offered by the United States under the first President Bush. He brought countries to the United States, to Washington, and we had the first negotiating session to establish the Climate Convention. That was 25 years ago. 1,000 people came. At the ministers' meeting, we had 50,000 people. At the meeting in Paris, we had no heads of state. We had actually no ministers. We had a number of technical people thinking about how to establish a regime. Today, we have more than 100 heads of state participating themselves in the negotiation. Every minister comes. Every country has made a commitment in terms of a fundamentally different kind of an outcome. That's only 25 years. Let's not look quite that far back. 10 years ago, this organization was formed and it had 18 cities. Today, there are more than 90. 10 years ago, we had a relatively small share of the global population. Today, if you look at the structure for cities, you're more than 25%, and the surrounds get you much higher still, and the urbanization has proceeded from only 35 or 40% 25 years ago to, we expect, 25 years from now, more than 2/3 of people will live in and around urban centers. This is the change that we have to think about, and it's in this context that climate occurs. So what's happened on the climate front in those same years? Well, at the beginning, we had the Framework Convention on Climate Change, negotiated fairly quickly. We had a process that moved us forward and gave us an outcome, and it was non-binding, and we had hopes to develop inventories. Those inventories have stayed with us. What we monitor and measure, we control. That's been 25 years of progress, and we've seen that. Fast forward, we had a group then in Kyoto at the Kyoto Protocol thinking about the establishment of good policies and mechanisms to drive the agenda. But only a handful of countries ultimately adopted those. A relatively small share at that point in time, back in 1995, and then further in 1997, thought this was the priority. 20 years from that, we have Paris. Every country's in. 186 nations have prepared nationally determined contributions. They are acting at a discrete level, at a local level, at a regional level, at a state level, at an international level. That's now engaged every country in the world. What a shift. What's happened in technology? The same kinds of development. If we look back at the period around the time of the establishment of the convention, we were in a mode in which the majority of the world's electricity was produced by coal. Today, that's no longer the case, and it's declining very rapidly. We've seen a sharp decrease in the price of solar, a factor of 10 in just the last 8 years. We've seen a sharp decrease in the cost of wind, over a factor of 3 in the same period. We've seen enormous investment. Last year, according to Mr. Bloomberg and his team, last year we had more investment in renewables globally than we had in fossil fuel. This is a fundamental shift and alters the perspective for the future. So where does that take us? What are the commitments that countries have made, and how do we understand these? And Minister Royal has talked about the broad context of Paris and where it is. I want to break it down a little bit further into a couple of key actors and key players. Let me start with China, the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter. China is committed to reduce the intensity of its greenhouse gas emissions 60 to 65% by the year 2030. It's an extraordinary number, but in fact, that's probably the lesser of the things that they're doing. More significant is China has committed that 20% of its total energy will be from non-emitting sources by 2030. To put that into context, if they succeed in delivering that, the entire United States electricity grid could be rebuilt on the back of non-emitting sources in China. This is an extraordinary commitment. India, major player, active in a significant way. Madame Royal noted the work on the Solar Alliance. India has taken this step forward. And not only do they also have an intensity target, but they've got a target for renewables and for solar. They want to install 100 gigawatts of solar. Let us make no mistake, the combination of China and India and the European Union and the United States and Canada, we will drive the price down. The most recent cost coming from the United Arab Emirates, 2.4 cents a kilowatt hour. If we add the next 300 gigawatts, it will probably be cut in half. At that point, this is no longer the constraint. It's not a problem in price. It's a problem in regulatory structure. It's a problem in market orientation. These are things we can deliver. Let me turn to what's coming forward then. How do we think about the political hurdles that we have? How do we manage the dynamic that we have before us? So we certainly have these commitments. We have countries acting, but we have some interesting plays in the market. The market is actually moving. But let's talk a bit about what the constraints are. Currently, there's almost $7 trillion. Let me repeat that. $7 trillion in the market that's earning negative interest. That's a stunning number. It means that, in fact, bondholders are paying the government's money to hold their funds because they don't see good returns on investment in other places. This is not a problem of capital constraint. This is a problem on liberating capital and making it attractive for investment. And all of you in the room are working on it, and we have examples from cities around the world that are doing exactly this. New York, clearly with the Metropolitan Transit Agency, has looked at doing green bond issues to manage risk. Johannesburg, looking at the transport sector to manage where it's going, over 150% oversubscribed. Mexico City, a new bond issue for a green airport that will be LEED Platinum. All of this moving forward, ways to find return on investment that can move that capital from the sidelines into the system. And companies are acting. The Consumer Goods Forum, just to give an example, has committed itself to looking at the supply chain for food, fiber, and products and make those sustainable. Big players, Unilever, Kellogg, Coca-Cola, international partners like Nestle. This is changing. But let me come finally to perhaps one of the big elephants in the room. We just had an election in the United States. And I note the consequences of that were largely framed in the meetings in Morocco and have been part of the discussions here in this room with mayors. And I'd like to tell you that there are a number of possible ways that it could proceed. The first one is that we in fact decide with the United States unclear about its next steps, and we should be sure we do not yet know what they will be. But with the United States unclear, the world will take a pause. I don't believe that's possible or desirable or the likely outcome. What I see instead is in this room an enormous will to act, But that was reflected also at the meeting we just came from in Marrakesh, where we affirmatively said we intend to continue. And Madame Royale noted this. It was explicit in a declaration that was adopted about 5 days after the US election, reaffirming Paris, reaffirming intent, moving countries forward on next steps. So how do we keep pushing? It's up to you. It's up to states. It's up to the private sector. It's up to civil society. Actors have to move jointly to make this happen. And if we do, we have a process and a progress that will look like the last 25 years. Going forward, we can succeed. We can get to the mid-century strategies of 80% and more reductions at a global level. The cities have done that with your deadline 2020. You have laid out your own pathway. We at the national government level have laid out our pathway. We can work together to achieve this. But there's not much time. At the end of the day, the process is moving only just fast enough to keep pace with the science and the damages. Secretary Kerry, en route to Marrakesh, stopped in Antarctica. Not exactly a direct trip, but he stopped in Antarctica on the way up. And in the scientists' briefing there, he was told about one glacier called the Pine Island Glacier that is melting at an incredible rate. By itself, that one glacier would give us 1.5 meters of sea level rise, 5 feet. You think you had a problem with the 30 centimeters in New York? You think you have a problem with 1 foot that you see in some parts of the world with flood tides? 5 feet, one glacier. Now, it won't happen right away. We're not planning, and it has to happen immediately, and we have to prepare ourselves, and we have to move forward to offset those reductions. But those in this room, and those in the international community with your back, I think we can succeed, and I look forward to working with you to make this happen. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pershing. Please welcome back to the stage, because you're going to be our first panelist. Thank you so much for those words. Now I would like to invite to the stage our session chair, Mr. Dan Esty, who is the Hillhouse Professor at Yale University and the Director of the Yale Center of Environmental Law and Policy. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here. Mr. Esty will be joined by the Mayor of Montreal, Denis Coderre, the Deputy Secretary General of Wuhan's Municipal People Government, Wan Li-dong, the Mayor of Washington, D.C., Mario Bowser, and Connie Hedegaard, who is the chair of the KR Foundation and former European Commissioner for Climate Action and former Danish Minister for Climate and Energy. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Mr. Esty.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And Jonathan, thank you for setting up our discussion here this morning. One of the things that Paris and the agreement agreed upon last December is already being noted for is the recognition that we are going to need bottom-up solutions if we're to deliver on the ambitious targets that have been set. And I think the spirit of today's conversation, we're all in this together, asking the question how national governments can work with states and provinces and cities is a critical part of that pathway forward. So before we jump into the conversation, I want to ask all of you to open your Summit apps on your phone and answer the question that we have set out for this conversation and to engage your own personal thoughts as we move forward. So the question, which I'll read out, but I urge you to open your phones and answer it. This is a survey that we're going to come back to in a few minutes. And here's the question. What sector requires the most coordination across all levels of government to drive successful climate change action? And you have a range of choices: buildings, drainage and flood management, energy supply and renewable power, financing for clean energy and carbon addressing issues, public transport and mobility, urban planning, waste and resource management, or water supply and treatment. So again, if you would just take a minute to answer that question, we're going to come back and try to get the feel of the room in just a few minutes. I'm now going to start the questions for our panel, and I've asked Secretary General Dong to lead the conversation. And Secretary General, you in Wuhan have been working to deliver on the national Chinese government's climate change targets at the local level. And I would like to ask you to talk for a few minutes about how that's going and how Wuhan is pursuing international cooperation as it pursues its own local agenda on climate change. Secretary General Deng. 1 point, please. Secretary General Deng will be speaking in Chinese, so I encourage you to pick up your headsets so we can all follow him.
That would be helpful.
Good morning, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Buenos dias. 对气候变化的共同关切，让我们今天很荣幸地相聚在墨西哥城。中国政府是应对全球气候变化的积极参与者和推动者，对促成11月4日巴黎协定正式生效起到了重要的作用。协议生效的当天，中国政府发布了“十三五”控制温室气体排放的工作方案，明确了未来5年温室气体控排的主要目标和重要任务，将国家自主贡献目标和国内的行动连在一起，提出了将支持优化开发区域碳排放率先达到峰值，力争部分重工业2020年左右达到实现率先达峰。目前呢，我们中国已经有23个省区和城市试点，提出了在2030年以前，当然已经还含2030年，达到二氧化碳排放达到峰值。2015年，武汉和中国的11个省市参加了第1届中美气候峰会，提出了在2022年左右，我们的碳排放达到峰值的目标。这既是响应这个中国政府应对气候变化目标和战略，为全球温室升温控制在2摄氏度以内的努力，也是实现我们武汉自身可持续发展的内在要求。武汉是中国中部地区的中心城市，面积是8569平方公里，人口1060万。由于历史的原因呢，武汉的产业结构较重，在发展的过程中也经历了和其他世界各城市之间所遇到过的环境问题。但为促进我们城市绿色低碳转型，武汉积极推动3低一降。是什么3低一降呢？是这个产业低碳、能源低碳、生活低碳和生态降碳。产业低碳方面呢，我们大力淘汰落后产能。过去的5年，我们规模以上工业万元增加值综合的能耗下降了20%。能源低碳方面呢，去年武汉市的能源消耗总量是4858万吨标准煤，同比增长了2.3%，但是增幅是历史上的新低。煤炭的消耗比重首次下降到50%以下，单位 GDP 的二氧化碳的排放比上一年降低了7.2%。在生活低碳方面，我们倡导绿色出行。15年呢，我们已建成了4条轨道交通线，运营里程是145公里。在未来的5年呢，我们还将建成这个通车里程达400公里的这个轨道交通线网，累计推广新能源汽车10539辆，投放公共自行车2万辆。同时呢，我们注重提升我们武汉市民的这个环保意识、这个绿色意识，推出了这个碳宝宝 APP， 引导全民践行低碳生活。另外，在生态降碳方面，2015年呢，武汉建成区绿化覆盖率达到40%，森林的覆盖率稳定在28%。我们提出在2022年左右，二氧化碳的排放量达到峰值，也就是说是1.44亿吨。达到这个目标呢，我们还有许多困难也挑战。所以说呢，我们在未来的几年将围绕着气候变化这个目标，实施6大这个低碳工程，就是产业结构低碳化、 能源体系低碳化，建筑行业低碳化，交通体系低碳化，城市生态低碳化以及办公生活低碳化，通过组织领导、政策配套、资金支持、人才建设和技术支撑这5大这个保障，统筹推进我们市的应对气候变化工作。另外，我想强调一点，就是说这个气候变化需要国际社会的通力合作，共同应对和解决。这武汉在应对气候变化的国际合作方面呢，一直采取非常积极的措施，而且形成了我们自身的一些典型案例。比如说，我们已经开工建设的这个中法武汉生态示范城项目，将打造应对全球气候变化和后工业化时代城市可持续发展的生态示范之城。武汉和这个法国波尔多市开展的碳计量这个项目呢，这个在第5届中法地方政府合作高层论坛上也获奖。另外，就在上个月，我们还跟英国的曼彻斯特市这个签署了环境保护和气候变化方面的合作备忘录。此外呢，我们还和这个美国的能源基金会、落基山研究所、自然资源保护协会以及世行和亚行等，都开展了富有成效的这个合作和交流。这些合作和交流呢，应该说对我们来讲，既是双赢，也是多赢，因为它让我们一起有效地去应对气候变化，所以这方面的意义是不可估量的。另外呢，我想借此机会，想强调的一点就是说，我们在应对气候变化方面的合作，离不开 C40这个支持和帮助。正是在这个平台的有效这个运作下，我们相互之间，我们现在已经有90个城市啊，我们90个城市之间呢，这个相互交流，这个取长补短，这个分享成果啊，增进友谊。所以说呢，这个我们并且从中受益。我们非常感谢这个平台，也特别在此呢也特别感谢呢，就是说我们今年武汉在申报国家适应性城市建设试点的过程当中呢，也得到了各位成员城市的支持和帮助，在此呢对大家一并表示感谢。
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary General Deng, and thank you for giving us that comprehensive perspective. And I think Wuhan does represent one of the great examples of international collaboration and of the benefits of thinking about best practices and transferring them from one place to another. Mayor Bowser, if I could turn to you. Sure. You represent a great U.S. city that also happens to be the seat of the national government. Yes. So you have to deal every day with this interface between the national government and the city scale. And I wonder if you could just tell us how that's working, and are you able to get the resources you need, the support you need to ensure a sustainable infrastructure for the city of Washington, D.C., and to address the climate change issues that you want to take up?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to say, because when you put up that slide earlier, and then you were going and asking the question, which of these is most important to work through all the different levels of government? And as I was looking through those different sectors, I realized that as a city, county, state, mayor, governor, we influence or control just about every sector that was listed there. Now, certainly the national government can be important in bringing energy and scale around all of those things and coming up with solutions around finance and bringing larger scale thoughts to these issues. But the reason I think you have mayors interested in gathering and talking about climate change is because we can fund, plan, and implement along all of those sectors in relatively short periods of time. So we rely on the national research and innovation certainly to show us best practices, and that's why we're here now. But we can move relatively quickly on the things that work. Now, as it relates to Washington, D.C., we are unique in the system of government in the United States. We are the nation's capital and a federal district. And the mayor of Washington, D.C. functions like the governors of the states. Now, Mexico City was recently in this situation but became a state, and that is the path that we are on in Washington, D.C. as well. So our interaction, even though we're proximate to the Capitol in the White House, we don't actually have a vote in Congress. We don't have 2 senators, and we don't have a representative in the House of Representatives. So our interactions with the federal government are unique. Now, having said all that, we function just like any of the other states. So when it comes to transportation dollars, we seek those funds like other states. When it comes to regulation around the environment, we interact with the national government in the same way. I will say what's different is that because of our size and the profile we have as the nation's capital, many people will seek to use Washington in good ways and sometimes not so good ways as an example for the nation. And so I think we see that as an opportunity when it comes to innovation around environmental issues. And that's why we've been so focused on using the immense procurement power that I have. We're a city of about 670,000 people, but we have a $13 billion budget. And so we were able, because of the good work of our team and staff, to come up with a very innovative win agreement, for example, that's going to allow us to energize our public buildings for the next 20 years and save over $20 million. We actually had a very innovative transportation director that said one day, why don't we just have the best capital, bike share program of any American city, and we were able to implement that very quickly as well. So as we move into more uncertain times with city-national relationships, I think the challenge for American mayors is what space are we going to occupy? Now, with President Obama, who faced a very, how shall I say, a Congress that didn't agree with him a lot, he really embraced American mayors as a way to get things done. So how did the ideas that he developed on a national level actually get implemented? He partnered with mayors a lot. And so I think we all are going to kind of feel our way through this next bit of time where, the next president won't have that same challenge. But we have to demonstrate that mayors are leading and have the ability to make quick decisions and investments in climate solutions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for highlighting something I think everyone in the room knows is critical, and it's not just collaboration across levels of government, it is innovation and the ability of cities to break new ground and to do that relatively quickly. So I'd like to turn to Mayor Coderre. Congratulations to Montreal as one of the most recent additions to the C40
The new
city
kid in the
list.
block. Thank you. Thank you.
You heard Mayor Bowser express some challenges that may lie ahead. You have the opposite
With the White House? Me? Okay.
Well, you have a premier of Quebec who
Yeah.
seems very supportive of your agenda, a Prime Minister Trudeau, very supportive. So I'm interested in how you see the world when you have that kind of support around you. And then more broadly, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you see mayors leading the charge on climate change and what you in particular are thinking is the opportunity there.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Montreal is very pleased to be part of C40. We have a great metropolis. I'm also president of Metropolis, so I really believe that mayors matter. We don't have any walls, and we want to make sure that there's no walls. But frankly, I know Muriel for a couple of years, and like the others, we have to stick together. We don't have to ask permission to other levels of government. We matter. And for me, I was for 16 years a member of parliament and Minister of Government of Canada. So it's clear that when you have everybody who's sticking in the same goals, it's working better. We don't believe that coal is clean. We believe that hydroelectricity should be the one. We believe in electrification. We believe that by 2020 we should reduce the gas emission by 30% and by 2050, 80%. We are focusing, planting 300,000 trees by 2025. But listen, we all believe, we all at the same level. Climate change is the issue. You know, the world's collapsing. It's not just a matter of climate change. It's a matter of resilience. It's a matter of how to treat people. It's how the living together. I don't like what I'm seeing because as a former Minister of Immigration, you don't divide to conquer, and we have to be inclusive. So we like to say that Montreal is the capital of the living together, to find that balanced approach between openness and vigilance. We're not naive. We need vigilance against the worst. There is some radicalization that you have to take care of, but we have to be inclusive and learn from each other. And, you know, alone you can go faster, but together you go further. Now, saying that, we need to build up our own caucus here. We need to show that, you know, we have the science, we have the technology, we have to, you know, we think the same, we have the same goal. Paris was amazing, but we have to go on. It's not just about cutting ribbons here, it's about to be efficient, to be relevant, and have some follow-up. The difference between an MOU and a contract is a political will. Mm-hmm. So what we have to do together is to stick together. Solidarity is in order. We can have great national governments. It's not to have a war against other level of governments, but it's to show them that if 47% of the gas emission is, you know, by transport, and we all know that 75% in the next 20 years of the population will live in cities, the formidable challenges and the solutions lies in cities. So you can have all the greatest policy in the world, but if you don't have the tools to work with, and if we don't have the capacity to address those issues, it won't work. It's going to be a great conference, but it's not going to make any results. So Metropolis, C40, IMF, ICLE, Compacts for Mayors, all those organizations are important. The Think Global, Act Local agenda is important. I tried to put up together in the last 3 years because as a new mayor, I focus on what I call the urban diplomacy. Urban diplomacy means that between countries, we should all work together, there's different cities of countries, but at the same time, it's a way to develop strategy among ourselves, internally. How can we work with the states? How can we work with the national government? How can we make sure that they are, you know, the diligence and accountable? And frankly, the more we stick together as mayors, the more we're talking about it, the global village exists. It's not just silos anymore. And I was particularly moved by the two speech by Ségolène, or our friend here from the States. And, you know, we have the facts here. All we need to do is to connect the dots. So our role for C40 is to connect the dots. Now, I'm lucky because in Canada, a great progressive country, we're investing a lot. So social infrastructure, green infrastructure, innovation, R&D. Pay tribute to my friends from Vancouver, Gregor Robertson or John Tory in Toronto. We all stick together, so solidarity is in order. But we have to be vigilant, and I'll conclude with that. We need to have that energy transition. So there are some people who'd like to promote pipelines right now, and we have that situation in Canada. There was a bad decision, we feel, for the sake of our own agenda in the West, and I show solidarity to my friend from Vancouver, but I'm going to live exactly the same thing with Energy East and TransCanada. And sometime, you know, if we don't mobilize ourselves, work with the civil society, work with the First Nation, the Aboriginal, working with the mayors, we might have some disappointment. So that's why it's important to have that kind of strategy to all show solidarity.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for stressing the need for working across lines and getting people to come together on these issues. It does seem that this is the moment where that needs to be stressed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hedegaard, if I could turn to you. You have been at this longer than many in the high government positions. You've seen thick and thin when it comes to climate change. And I wonder if you could just tell us how the role of cities has emerged and evolved in the decade plus that you've been working on the climate change issue, what you think we've done well, and then what remains to be done, what still needs to be done going forward with regard to that agenda.
Thank you very much, Dan. Well, first I would say to compare what the cities are doing today and then just 10 years ago, that's two different worlds, and not the least due to C40 and the way you inspire one another. I think it's incredibly important. So I could talk lengthy about that. But I do think that if you are at a government, it's sort of a separate world, what the cities are doing. Somehow you have governments here, and you have the cities here. And as we just heard from the Mayor of Montreal, there is a need somehow to bridge these things. And I wondered if, as part of your urban diplomacy, would it be worthwhile to suggest that there should be some kind of council at the national level where the national level and the cities and the business would sit together to take stock jointly, but maybe also to do a labor division jointly to say who is doing what. Because I do not know if you share this feeling. As much as so many good things are happening out there in the cities, there is a tendency that you have a lot of standalone projects. And then at the national level, now they are looking for the difficult solutions. I guess Jonathan Pershing is right that we are on track when it comes to energy. But the next big battlefields will be transportation, it will be buildings, and then it will also be agriculture. But I mean, here the cities will be absolutely key. And how to bridge between the state level, the regional level, the cities level. I think that there's something to think about there. And my other point today, looking forward, would be linking to what has been said about also financing. Every day, a lot of good things are happening out there. But we also know that every day, a lot of wrong decisions are made that are not including climate change, the low carbon emission trajectory that we need to get on. In the financing sector, that is the same. How to change that? Recently, I delivered a report to the Prime Minister of Norway on how that country should be less dependent on oil and gas. And in that report, we suggested 10 principles. We said if these 10 principles would be the basis for policy making, that could bring us quite a long step forward, and investors would sort of have more credibility, would trust more that we are on the right track. What are these principles? Very, very briefly. The first principle was make the polluters pay. And you could say that's an old established principle. Yes, but now we should start actually live as if it was a real principle. The second principle, that was price externalities, totally consequently. We really need a price signal there that goes for city levels, regional levels, national levels, finance ministries. Price externalities, totally consequently. Third principle, change the taxation accordingly. Tax more what we want less of, and tax less what we want more of. The fourth principle is make it possible for consumers and citizens to make informed choices. That means it must be visible, it must be easy, it must be labeled, it must be accessible for me as a citizen to do the right stuff. The fifth principle is public procurement must be green. Not should, not sometimes, it should be a no-brainer that when we have public procurement, the public sector at all levels are investing in something, it must be done with sort of the low carbon trajectory in sight. And that links to the sixth, that is our planning and investments. When we do them, we should think for the 2050 horizon, not just for 2020 or for 2030. That's very important, for instance, for infrastructure. And then the seventh principle, we must sort of apply a life cycle perspective that must be integrated in the policy choices we make. And the eighth, that new proposals should, as a natural thing, calculate the CO2 impact, as natural as we are in calculating economic impact. And the ninth principle was that, of course, we must build on well-functioning markets, and finally, we should report on what we want to be achieved and what we want to avoid. I think if we sort of had a set of economic principles like that, directing our policy, informing our policy making at all levels, that could make us take in a cost-efficient and faster manner, take some of the very big decisions that we need to take in politics for the next years to make Paris not just a nice and solid outcome, but also actually delivering on it.
Commissioner, thank you very much.
Great.
I see some common themes starting to emerge, including this idea of integration. Mayor, did you want to just add a point on that?
I just want to add something. Protocol and governance. That's the issue. Because we can, and the principles are great, and we are living that, we are doing all those things. But it will be important at one point. And like for the United Nations, for example, okay, we can have all those great treaties, everybody is in agreement, but if you don't have that kind of co-governance between local governments and countries, it won't work. So first thing first, we need to make sure that cities are defined as governments and that we are part of the solution, and in the protocol for the results to apply those principles, that link, I think, is a matter of governance.
So I think that's actually a good point to pause, and let's look at the survey results, which are going to highlight some of these issues, and we're going to find out what our audience believes are the critical points of connection. So if we can post those, we have our survey results ready to go. All right. Not sure what you all make of this, but I think we've heard all of these points raised by one or another of our speakers this morning, and it does seem like really the answer is the package as a whole is what's critical. So with that, let's move on. Jonathan, I'd like to turn to you, if I could. You gave us a perspective, and you are also one of the folks who helped shift gears in Paris with the idea that each country should develop its nationally determined contribution to addressing climate change. And I'm wondering, as you think about how those NDCs are going to unfold in the coming years, what role cities are going to play, and how we're going to, with regard to what several of the mayors and speakers have suggested, how we're going to track it, how we're going to gauge it, how we're going to add it up, and how we're going to make sure that it really does follow through in an integrated way.
So thanks very much, Dan. I would make a couple of comments, first reflecting on the poll we just saw, and then secondly to your question. I'm struck in the poll that people were looking at energy as a key component. 30% of the respondents picked up on that particular question. And yet in some sense, I would agree with Connie, energy is actually doing reasonably well. It's a market problem. We've got to get a bit more financing in place. Cities are beginning to think through their solar rooftop programs and cladding for buildings and how you might do that. But that technology is pretty far advanced. I'm struck more in some ways that cities are at the forefront of two other pieces, and it's the building space and the transport space. And that's harder, and we don't have the same kind of advanced technologies moving there. And there may be a real role to be played in that regard. And to me, this is where one of the intersections might be most productive. If I take a look at what the national government in the United States is doing, and I spent the previous 3 years before I came back to the foreign policy side advising the Secretary of Energy on climate and energy policy, I'm struck in the transport sector by some real windows of opportunity. One's electrification, fabulous in terms of scale, it's moving forward really very quickly. A second is, of course, the mass transit. A third is efficiency. A fourth is, in fact, some alternative fuel structures and where things are going. But modal shifts play a big role here in the transport sector, not only in the personal vehicle side, but in the transport side. On buildings, we have similar kinds of things. A number of cities are now looking at being net zero emissions from buildings. Singapore, a clear leader in this domain. We're seeing places, Copenhagen pushing this very, very aggressively. Montreal's got some programs in this. Washington's begun to take this on as a serious question. This is the future. How do you use federal government programs? How do you collaborate between partners to make this happen? How do you take advantage of work that Yale is doing and MIT is doing and the universities in Denmark are doing? These are our communities and constituencies. I want to close just with one last point. I am struck in the international negotiations how much is about competitiveness. how much we worry that if we do well, others will perforce do less well. That the competition for jobs and the competition for success and access to companies and finance is a zero-sum game. Anyone wins, somebody else has to lose. What I'm struck by in the city's conversation is a very different discussion. Every one of you collects trash. Every one of you manages water. Every one of you manages urban congestion. You don't do better if somebody else does worse. You have a fundamentally different form of collaboration here. And if I could urge that forward, it seems that that may be a place where you bring an information piece to governments at a national level, but you bring your own processes through this and other fora to think about collective solutions that are likely to be part of our success.
Jonathan, thank you, because I think that actually sets us up for the last little bit of our conversation today. We are going to be in a lightning round, so 1 to 2 minute answers so that we can get through. But I would like to ask Secretary General from Wuhan, Secretary General Dong, if you could tell us, in answer to Jonathan's point, what is it from your perspective that C40 might do to support the collaboration within China and internationally to bring some of these best practices to bear and to create that collaboration that we've talked about? Secretary General Dong.
好，非常感谢 C40给城市提供的各种支持和帮助，所以在下一步的城市应对气候变化的工作中呢，我们希望就是 C40能够在以下几个方面提供更多的支持。一呢是在城市低碳发展方面提供能够适应城市特点和需求的技术支持，这是从技术上。二呢，是在城市减缓和适应气候变化的具体项目上，能够提供更多的绿色的金融支持，也就是说资金支持。三呢，就是我们能有效地发挥C40这个平台作用，完善优化我们城市之间相互的交流，我刚才已经提到了，就是我们交流情况，分享经验，共享成果，互利合作，完善这个机制。另外最后一点呢，就是我觉得我们希望C40呢，今后会能够进一步加强与有关国家中央政府之间的沟通联系。为什么这么说呢？因为这便于我们 C40的成员城市政府在 C40框架下开展应对气候变化的工作中呢，与各自的国家的相关的任务和目标政策能够达到协调统一。好，谢谢。
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask our other two mayors, is there anything in that survey result that struck you? And is there any priority you have in thinking about where C40 goes in supporting the kinds of collaboration being talked about? Mayor Bowser, do you want to start?
Sure. I would just say I was struck by some of the comments earlier as well about financing, because that's where I see our biggest challenge. We just completed a study of our infrastructure, looking at all of our public buildings, our streets, alleys, you name it, and their condition, and what it's going to take our city to invest in those assets. So at some point, we're not talking about a bridge falling in the river, because we've actually maintained it and how we're going to plan for it. And the bottom line is, when your cities and you're asking your local taxpayers to make all of those investments, there's a limit to which you can ask. So we have, for example, already started a whole initiative around public and private partnerships and looking at projects that we know are coming down the pike, and to see how we can get the private sector involved. And that's the type of thing that we are interested in C40 and our federal government helping us think about. As we have really big projects that need to be changed. For example, you talk about our water system. We're under a decree from our Environmental Protection Agency to build 4 huge tunnels that will separate, long story, combined sewer issue that we have in the district. 4 huge tunnels at a cost of $4 billion. Now, we have examined it over the years and have pushed back and are coming up with some green jobs and a green way to deal with some of it, but still we have to build 4 huge tunnels. And so it is important for us to think about ways to finance that, because right now, who's financing it is the ratepayer. And right now, I have citizens, I have residents of my city who are seeing water bills go up 20 and 30%. Literally, people who used to have a $15 water bill over the next 5 years could have a $100 water bill to help pay for some of these projects that we need. So the financing and innovations with financing and how we leverage the public's dollar, the ratepayer's dollar, with the private sector dollar is huge for us.
Well, I would want to echo that, having spent my career studying environmental protection and looking at how we're going to have to do things differently in the 21st century from the 20th. And I would say one of the questions we didn't ask in any systematic way in the 20th century was, where is the money going to come from for all the things we need to do? And the second point you made, I agree, we had a whole structure of environmental programs and law focused on red lights, telling people what they had to stop doing or couldn't do. And the 21st century has to be, as you've said, about green lights, about incentives to engage people in making these investments and doing the good things that need to be done. Mayor Coderre, same question. Anything strike you, and do you have any particular thoughts for C40?
Well, I understand energy, but it would have been the first thing. We are focusing on that already, but it's a matter of, I think, sustainable mobility and buildings and waste management. So that's the issue. Everything is related to traffic, the drinkable water, what are we doing with our garbage? You know, when you go in certain cities, they're stuck with that problem. We can try to reinvent the wheel, but we have to be really focused and down to earth, and that's the issue that we have to take a look at. You see, we have governments who are willing to invest a lot, so we are doing that through the electrification process, green infrastructure. Social infrastructure is important too, because you cannot think about economic development without talking about social cohesion or sustainable development. So I'm very in favor about all the procurement and focusing on every time that you put up together some bids that it has to be green too. But prevention and inclusiveness and awareness. I mean, we will ban plastic bags. Those gestures where everybody is part of the solution, I think it's important. So it's not just a matter of relation with other level of governments. It's about the relation that you have with your citizen and make sure that everybody is part of the solution. But I think most of the people, we're all thinking the same way. It's all about making sure that we are focusing in the same strategy to make things better.
Commissioner Hedegaard, with our last minute, I invite you to offer a thought on anything that we haven't addressed that you think needs to be part of the agenda going forward.
I think the big advantages for the cities are that you're very close to the citizens. And I think that many of us had this feeling after Paris. Wow, now we are on track, now we are moving. And then suddenly EU is preoccupied with Brexit and other stuff, and there's a new administration coming in the US, and you see how fragile it is. But we need to carry the citizens. And that's why I think, like in journalism, you should sort of be the ones where we say, don't tell it, show it. Show the co-benefits, show how it can be a creative city. Show, as we saw yesterday in the transport session, you have new spaces, a new kind of city. It's attractive, it's creative, it's something I, as a citizen, want to be part of. I think there to focus on that and to focus on the behavioral part, we need to understand better what is it that also make people, citizens, wanting to be part of that. Sure. Here the cities are better placed than any national government. So all the best.
Thank you. And before we bring Vanessa back to tell us what the rest of the morning looks like, please join me in a big round of applause for our panel.
Thank you. I'm applauding.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you to all the mayors. Thank you, Dr. Pershing. That was a fascinating conversation. And I think that you are absolutely right. I mean, climate change is an issue that affects everyone in the planet, and we need from everyone in the planet to solve it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.